Stan Gibilisco here, proprietor and operator of amateur radio station W1GV, Whiskey 1, Golf Victor. The frequency that you're looking at right now, 7.185 megahertz, is the frequency on which I made my first contact in 1966, when I was licensed as a novice operator WN0OKV. Back then, the novice band went from 7.150 to 7.200 megahertz on this 40-meter band. Oh, how times have changed, I guess. I had to use crystal control, and I was limited to 50 watts DC power input, which translated to about 25 watts output. I had a dipole antenna in the backyard, a Johnson Viking Adventurer transmitter, and a Hallicrafters SX130 shortwave receiver. And I made a contact with a station in a town called Zeeland, Michigan. I remember that very well, in March of 1966. And I just about freaked out. So I'm going to take a little trip down memory waves. Now what you hear on this part of the band is sideband. The CW band, I think, only starts down right about here. I don't have a very good antenna for hearing anything on this band or any band below it, but it'll pick up some signals. Like good old W1AW, where I worked from 1977 to 1978. This is them. So that indicates that the band, of course, is open. Now, I didn't get on 80 meters for quite a while because I didn't have an antenna that was long enough, but I did have a crystal for that band, and I don't remember exactly what it was. I think it was 3730. Back then, they called them kilocycles. 3730, it was in the novice band, I believe. I think this was the frequency. Not hearing much for the noise on this band, but later on, finally, I got down to 160 meters. Now, the other night, I actually did hear... See? Can you hear that? It was very faint. Oh, does that bring back memories? In the winter of 1987 to 1988, when I lived at my parents' house recovering from a serious injury and flew a balloon vertical for the first time on this band. Spent many a night in great pain recovering from that injury, and ham radio got my mind off that pain. There was a guy who got onto AM on this band somewhere, and he was kind of a landmark signal on this band. I worked a lot of good stuff on that band with a quarter wavelength balloon vertical, 120, 130 feet high, up on top of a hill. I remember that well. Now I'm going to take you down further into the AM broadcast band and see if I can find...
Now, when you were little, I didn't let you... That sort of thing. Such statements often have a built-in...
That has to be WCCO in Minneapolis, St. Paul, because I believe they're a clear channel station.
And that is something I have to really keep track of with Jolyn. You have to remember to listen.
Well, I'm not going to hang around on them very long because rebroadcasting any significant amount of a program on commercial broadcast is a no-no. I don't remember where WLS Chicago is. That might be them. I'm not sure. It's nighttime here. The date, January 23rd, 2014. The time, 9:43 p.m. Mountain Standard. That would translate into January 24th, 2014 at 0443, just turned to 0444 Zulu. Now we're getting down below the broadcast band, and ham radio operators are looking forward to getting a band down here, maybe even two. Let's see what we hear. I don't know if those are birdies or what. I have heard signals down here, though. I was always very interested in these long wavelengths. In fact, if I ever get a place in Wyoming, might call it the Long Wave Ranch or something like that, where I can fly kite and balloon supported antennas and get on these frequencies. Could just barely hear that. And it just gets weaker and weaker. But those are signals. That's not a birdie. That sounds like a phase shift keyed signal of some kind. More of that, possibly narrow frequency shift keying. A lot of that takes place down here. Narrow band emissions because there's not much spectrum to work with. You can't very well get away with. A sideband signal here is going to be a lot bigger proportionately than it would be up on, say 20 meters. This is the megahertz frequency right here you're looking at. See, 255 kilohertz. Down we go, down we... Now, there is a station called WWVB that transmits signals that those clocks, they call them atomic clocks or atomic time standard clocks. It's down on 60 kilohertz. Let's see if we can hear them. That's them. You ought to be able to, you think you'd hear them on a receiver like this when an atomic clock with a teeny little antenna in it can track it down here in the Nerd Cave. Then we go down, down, down. This radio will go all the way down to 30 kilohertz. And then it cuts off, and it goes up to the top of its range, which is 174 megahertz. And yet, some of the most interesting signals you'll ever hear come below 30 kilohertz. And it doesn't take much of an antenna to pick them up either if you have the right kind of a converter. I've described that in some of my other videos, by the way. I believe in the Murphy's Nemesis sequence of videos I describe how I was able to receive signals below 30 kilohertz. But that'll be just about enough from here, from the Nerd Cave Memory lane, though, I remember very well this WCCO. I'm just going to...
Also, they said here are some...
That station, WCCO 830, I remember listening to the Minnesota Twins on that station when I was a kid. Oh, I was a Twins fan. I even went to a World Series game in 1965 and watched Sandy Koufax pitch. The Twins beat him, something like 5-2. He was probably the greatest pitcher who ever lived, Sandy Koufax, for the Dodgers. Well, that'll just about do it from here. Stan Gibilisco, signing off from Memory Waves. W1GV Whiskey 1 Golf Victor. X WN0 Ocean Kilo Victor. Grew up in Minnesota, moved around, ended up here in Paha Sapa, where the Lakota people come to pray. Until next time, 73, and so long.